One of the things we have learned is that to just sometimes clearly in a conversation say, like, is this a work conversation or is this a personal conversation? Does he have his dad hat on or does he have his work hat on? Do I have my daughter hat on or do I have my work hat on? You know that you guys aren't the first company to ever go through a transition. Like, there are people who help with this for a living. We do not need to struggle through this alone.
We always use the phrase, a roadmap, not a plan.
Hey there, and welcome to Your Next Gen Friend, a successor's guide to business transition, a podcast for figuring out what's next in or beyond your family business. I'm Andrea Carpenter, transition strategist and second gen. Around here, we talk about the real stuff, family dynamics, identity, leadership, wealth, and how to define success on your own terms. Here's to finding your own way forward. I'm so glad you're here.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Your Next Gen Friend. Super excited to be here today with Aviva because she's actually one of our clients. So this is really special to have a story of succession and to get to share it almost in real time as it is unfolding. So Aviva, so glad that you're here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just give a little bit of background on who you are. Aviva is the Global Network Design Practice Leader. I think new title impending, and by the time this episode comes out, probably will have a new title. And you have deep expertise in supply chain network design, logistics, and technology integration. You're also the second generation leader stepping into a very interesting business, one that your dad has been in for a long career with a 50-50 partner and someone who is not related to you. So you guys recently came to work through your transition compass and your transition roadmap with one of our transition guides, Marcy, and hopefully returned with a little bit of clarity, confidence, and language about your next chapter. So super happy you're here.
Super excited to be here.
Awesome. Cool. Well, today I'm hoping let's give the listeners a little bit of like, who is Aviva? What is your background, things that you love, and then we can go your journey into the business and what it actually looked like to start working on a transition plan.
Before I started working at our family business, ProfitPoint, I actually started my career not in supply chain at all. After school, I really wanted to gain a different work experience. I wanted to not be tied to it, just kind of march on my own and see if I wanted to forge my own path first. I started at a small startup in the fintech industry where I started in an interesting role of being a startup. I kind of get to create your own role in some ways. So I started as a mix of like a back-end developer and working in pre-sales. And that gave me, I think, a lot of experience that I ultimately have used in transitioning to consulting. Our family business is a consulting business. I did that for about 2.5 years and realized that while I really liked it, it wasn't fulfilling everything I was looking for in a career. So I ultimately left that and was trying to figure out
what were some of those things that were missing for you in that like original job.
Good question. A lot of it was just flexibility around how I wanted to live my life. Some of it was I was fresh out of college. I was in New York City. I was working crazy hours, putting in a lot of energy into the job, and it was in some ways really fulfilling because I could really see the impact that my work was having. But in other ways, it was just really exhausting and I was ready for a bit of a change. I was finding New York City, it's a big city and it's amazing and I absolutely loved living there, but it was also really lonely. I had a lot of friends, but even still, I just felt just being that single person, just in the mass of people, I personally found it difficult. So I actually moved down to Philadelphia. I had a lot of friends from college that were living there. It felt like a little bit of a smaller, more manageable city. And so that was it was kind of a mix of like work, but also life and kind of what I wanted from both. And as I was looking for a new job, I would say I was open to almost anything. At that point, I decided I wanted to get into supply chain because I kind of was like, you know what? I think getting into the family business is interesting to me. So let me look for a role that will give me more industry background because I had really been working with like banks and other small finance companies and, gained expertise in that realm, but not so much in the supply chain realm. While I was kind of in a lucky position where before I had a transition period where my employer knew I was leaving, so I was openly able to look for roles as part of that transition. And while I was in the midst of it, my dad actually called me up one night and said, "Well, how would you feel about joining ProfitPoint?" And I was like, well, that wasn't quite in my game plan quite yet, but at the same time, I'm not going to say no. I've had other work experience, which was something that was really important to me. So Jim, his business partner, called me up, I think that same night, and just started talking to me about what the role would entail, what I'd be working on, what I had been working on. It really, I think, was an impromptu job interview that I wasn't necessarily prepared for. I think I actually remember standing in my kitchen making dinner throughout this whole conversation. But I just realized that opportunities sometimes just come up, and it didn't feel to me like maybe that was the right time, but I also realized like there's never, what is the right time?
Was that something that they were already like a position they were already thinking about hiring, or how did this like particular position that you ended up in come to be?
There was a need on some projects. So a lot of our hiring typically comes because we have projects we're looking to staff. So we had new projects coming down the pipeline. They were looking for a more junior person, which really was what I was at that point in time. And someone that had technical expertise. So in a way, there was a role that they did need to fill. And I think as they were thinking about how do we hire, right, my name came up, and knowing that I was already at a point where I was looking for a new job, they decided that let's reach out and see if this works. And it did. So I did, talked with both of them. I talked with a few other folks in the company that I would be working more directly with about what it would entail in the role. And I decided, why not join? And that was really how I first got started. The role I started in it's very different, I would say, from what I do today, but it's something that we still do, and it's really cool to have I'm glad I had that experience. It gave me insight into one part of the business, and even though I did that for, I guess I'll talk about that a little bit, right? So I started in that role, did trainings, got to really start getting my hands dirty on projects. But after a few months, I did realize, and I think I'd always kind of known this, that there still was some fundamental supply chain knowledge that I just didn't have because I hadn't been in a supply chain role previously. And while I was good at the technology piece of the role, and I could do the database work and the data pulling and all of that tech stuff, I was missing the supply chain stuff. And that was really important to have if I wanted to, I think, continue growing in my role and do more on the consulting side versus just kind of more on the back end side. So I looked to go back to school, and I applied to schools. I looked for, there's not a lot of them out there, but there are some master's programs in supply chain management. And so I applied and I went back to school. I went to MIT and got my master's in supply chain management. It was during the pandemic, so it was an interesting time to be back in school. But MIT was actually a great place to be, I would say, at that time. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot that year. And I went into it knowing that I was going to come back to ProfitPoint. So it was fun to be in school, and I was in a unique position where I knew, it was really like this 1 year gap, and I knew what I was coming back to.
Mm-hmm.
That said, though, when I came back, I did learn a lot in that year, and I realized that there's a lot of different type of work I was interested in. And before I left, I had actually worked a lot with Jim, my dad's business partner. And when I came back, I actually started working a lot with my dad. And that was the first time we had really done a lot of work together. And so that was definitely an interesting transition in and of itself, an experience of, day to day, really working on projects. A lot of them were actually just my dad and I. So it'd really be the two of us working on projects together. But it was a great learning experience, and it's led me into a lot of what I do today. So it's been good.
Yeah. And so obviously the context of work with us is this concept of transition. And I know a little bit of your story, but like, there's obviously time and lots of learning and working on projects that you have put into the company up to this point. So you've started working with your dad, you're doing projects together. Like, what sort of led to like, hey, maybe we should talk about, is there some type of change in leadership in this company in the future?
It's a good question. So, I mean, I won't tell my dad's story totally, but I think it's pretty well, there's pretty well known that he's been on the fence about, wanting to retire probably for the past 10 years. And he hasn't yet. But I think a lot of that was that I was interested in the business and getting to work with me. So I know for him, a lot of why he's hung around was to be able to get to work with me and pass it on if this was something that I was interested in. And as soon as I showed that I was interested in it, he hung along. Jim makes the joke that, he was ready to retire. So Jim called me up to bring me on board so that he would hang around a little longer. So I guess the story changes, how I got on board depending on who you ask. But it's been a experience, I would say, learning to work with my dad and figuring out, right, there's a personal relationship we have and there's a business relationship we have. And, the lines can get blurred. I will say, though, that one of the things we have learned is that to just sometimes clearly in a conversation say, like, is this a work conversation or is this a personal conversation? Because we can easily jump back and forth between the two. But I think sometimes, right, as we're talking, it's like, does he have his dad hat on or does he have his, work hat on? Do I have my daughter hat on or do I have my work hat on, right? And how we approach those conversations are going to be different based off of that. And so, a strategy we've found really helpful is to just like pause the conversation, like, is this a work conversation or is this a personal conversation? Right. So that I think we're not trying to blur those lines so much.
Yeah. Okay. So he's been thinking about retiring for a long time. Like, what was sort of that, like, we might need a little bit of extra support kind of navigating and thinking about what this might actually look like. Because I believe the first time we met, it was also a question of, I don't even know if me personally, if I'm in, like, if this is something I even want and I don't even understand or know what it might entail. So can you give a little bit more context on that piece?
Yeah. So when I first joined ProfitPoint, I think the idea of, is this something that I want to take over someday was like a very, very in the future thought of mine and really not in the forefront. And I really wasn't committed to it. I think anytime you walk into a family business and you start working at it, there are expectations that other people are always going to inherently have of you. And I didn't always have those expectations of myself. And so I think for me to try and counter that, I spent a lot of time like, is this something I want? Is this not something I want? Right? Just because other people might assume this, like, that doesn't mean that has to be the path that I walk down. Right? Because working at a business and owning a business are two very different things. And I wanted to work at ProfitPoint because I really loved the business that my dad and Jim had created. I thought it was a really great company to work at. And um, up until very recently, right, my point of view was that was really what I was looking for. It was like, where is a great place I can work and I can grow and I can start building on my career? Because when I first joined ProfitPoint, I was still young. I was easily the youngest employee. Um, and I knew I had a long road and then hopefully a long career ahead of me. Um, and so that I just, it took me a while to figure out what that approach was. There were, over the past few years, a few things kind of outside of all of our control that have happened that really forced that question a little bit more into the spotlight for me of, this may be something sooner than you were thinking. And it made me really start thinking more seriously about, is this something that I want? And I still wasn't ready to say, yes, this is something I want tomorrow, but more of like, in the next 2 to 3 years and, 5 years instead of the next 10 to 20 years. And with that, right, there were a lot of conversations we started to have between the three of us, a lot of conversations between my dad and I. And we had started to talk about, well, let's, we'll start showing you the ropes on this, or we'll start showing you the ropes on this. And that was great. And it always felt like there was a little something missing to me of, right, what is this really going to be like? Right. And I see this little snippet of it, but does that really tell me what this is going to be like for me and really help me determine, like, is this something that I want for myself and something that I want for my family, right? It's a different, in some ways it feels like it's a different way of living, right? There's a commitment that not only I have to make, but in a way my family has to make as well, because, and I think I've always felt that, right, having grown up as my dad's daughter, right, I saw the commitment that he make. I saw some of the hard decisions, that you have to make when you own a business, right? And the sacrifices sometimes, you give up in the business for your family and in your family for the business, right? And that it's really a two-way street, right? But that, there is a difference there than just being an employee. And what does that mean for me? So that's a really long way of saying that I think that our conversation, I had gotten to a point where I felt like our conversations would be more productive if we had someone guiding us through them. And actually, I can't take any credit for it because it was really my husband who one day was home and I got off the phone and, I was frustrated because sometimes I didn't feel like I was being heard or I was able to get my point across or like explain this to me or whatever it was. And he looks at me and he goes, that you guys aren't the first company to ever go through a transition. Like there are people who help with this for a living. And I was like, that's a great point. Like, you're right. We do not need to struggle through this alone. And so that's when I then, in my next conversation with my dad and Jim, brought up and was like, hey, how do we feel about seeing if there's someone who can help us, and guide us through this transition? And fortunately for me, they were very open to it. And through reaching out to our network, that's actually how we got connected with the transition strategists. And that's really where, our work together started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I think, I don't know if there's more to this, but I'm going to poke in case there is. Yeah. Like, I talk to a lot of successors and they're like, they see the need or they feel that need. And something I really appreciate about Jim and Alan is they seem very open and responsive to how you're feeling. Like I see this like recognition of like, oh, the next generation leader is saying that this would be something that's helpful for them. Would it also be helpful for me? Like, okay, let's give it a shot. But at least when they first said yes, I got a vibe more of like, we're saying yes for Aviva versus we're saying yes specifically like just for them on their own merit. But was there anything specific in that conversation of how you approach that with them, because we hear this a lot from successors. And I'm sure there's people listening on this podcast who are like, yeah, it would be so great to have help, but I don't even know how to start talking about this with my parents or the current owners of the business.
It's a good question. I mean, I think a lot of it depends on the relationship you have, right? I think I'm very fortunate in that I have a really good relationship with my dad. And I think it's not only that, but it's that I'm very fortunate in how supportive he is of me and wanting to make this easy for me, that he really doesn't have, and I think this is somewhat unique, but he doesn't have a lot of needs or wants of himself and how it's going to be, that this is really something he wants to give to me because it's something that I want. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it made that conversation really easy. And similarly with Jim, I've known Jim my whole life. And so in a lot of ways, he's really more like my uncle. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he's been there in a lot of the big moments in my life too. So it's, you know, we have this relationship. And so for me, it has always been easy to go to them with my wants and needs. I think if you don't have that though, I still think that, there's it feels to me like an easy case to be made, right? That if you have someone to help guide you through a transition, right? Having that third party, it makes the voices of both parties really be able to be heard in a way that sometimes I think when people try to just communicate within themselves, it's easy to like not really fully listen to what the other person is saying because you're thinking about how you're going to respond to like the first point they made, right? Mm-hmm. Or you get defensive. I mean, I don't know. I personally get very defensive. You know, it's like in my nature to get defensive over something, right? And I think that's where I've always seen the value in having a third party, is that sometimes it's helpful to have that recognition of like, I don't think they're attacking you, right? I think they're just voicing what they're trying to say, and it's not really have anything to do with you, right? And I think that's where there's like a nice case to be made for why it's so important to have someone guide you through it, because you know, even with the great relationship that the three of us have together, there's still a lot of emotions. And like in our immersion, when we were working on this with our guide, Marcy, like there were moments where like it got emotionally charged, right? And it's a big emotional thing that everyone is really, right? It's a business, it's your life. Like it's this thing that you've built. It's this thing that's really important to you, right? It's this place that you go every day, right? And so of course there's going to be emotions around that, right? Like you can't not have emotions around that, right? Whether it's you're giving it up or you're taking it on, right? There's always those emotions. And I think just having that person that can hold the space to help you all manage those emotions is so important. And that was really why, to me, it was so important to, you know, bring someone in to talk through it. And I think that, you know, I was lucky that Alan and Jim really were able to quickly understand the value of like having someone else to help with those conversations. And so, you know, I think that's where there's a case to be made for people that want to bring someone in, because it's like a mediator, right? Anytime you can have someone help facilitate that conversation, but also ask the right questions, right? Mm-hmm. To help draw out the things that are important for each person, and that, you know, really approach it in the way of like, I want to do this because I care so much that this goes well, right? And that I care so much that I'm not going to, you know, totally like turn over the company or turn it into something that you don't want it to be, right? I can't, like, it's a way of showing like how much you respect what they've built, right? And you want to continue it forward and you want to build on it for yourself. And I think that's why it's so important. So I don't know if I answered the question as you asked it, but
yeah, no, it is helpful. And to hear from other people about how it is helpful to them. And that's why we love to share stories, because each family, each business that we work with is so different and so unique in the things that are like the sticking points for them. There's truly no universal thing. But that being said, I continue to be impressed by the tools that we use with our companies, because if we answer the 6 questions in the transition compass and we start to do a transition roadmap for 96% of the businesses we work with, that is the essential questions that need to be answered, so that you know, like, okay, there are some gaps or some holes, or these are the things we probably need to talk more about. I would say really it's only in super, super high conflict situations is where we might need to do a little more work in advance of actually going through some of those questions. But really, really powerful. Was there a tool or a question or an activity that you guys went through that stands out as really impactful in your mind and helping you kind of navigate and start to think about what was next for you all?
Going through the objectives matrix was the most helpful, I think, for me. First, to really ground myself in what it is that I want, right? Going into our immersion, there was a still in some, I kind of settled on like, this is the path I want to walk down because this is why we're going through it. But I think there was still a little bit of hesitation, and going through that objectives matrix and really thinking through, right, why do I want to be doing this, right? Why is this important to me? Why is this important to my family, right? And what are the things that are going to be important to us in the future, right? And is, can those coexist for me? And what needs to happen to allow those to coexist, right? What's important? And then not just for me, but then also thinking about business, right? And the employees and the future there, right? What is important for me to make sure like gets preserved, right? What are the things I love about ProfitPoint that I don't want to lose as part of this transition, right? What are the things where, I feel like maybe I could do a better job in the future, right? And there's room for growth. And being able to really think through those and write those down to have a conversation. And I will say, like, once we started, right, we went through all of our objectives matrices and kind of listed it out. There was no surprises, I would say, on anyone's, Ellen or Jim's for me, but also seeing how kind of in sync we were. And even though we might have worded things differently in the goals of things we want to do, just how, like, there's a lot of continuity in what our objectives were, which made me really happy, and I think reassured that, like, okay, I'm going down the right path. And I would say just that piece of just grounding it, I think it brought up a lot of good conversation, right, around what does this really mean? And there are instances where I was like, what does this really mean to you, right? You wrote this down. What does that mean to you? Because I might interpret it differently, and really getting to lay that out all out on the table, I think was really helpful and really important.
Yeah, cool. And Marcy still talks about every time I talk with Marcy, she's like, it was so amazing. Like, I've never seen a group take so much action, like in the initial work. And so, like, as you worked through the tools, like, there were decisions that were made. I know some of them are still kind of in process and actively kind of happening and unfolding, but can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like and what that felt like, kind of sitting there and experiencing things that maybe you thought the timeline was going to go one way and then things were shifting and happening at a different pace?
Yeah. So it was actually, right, we did ours over the course of 3 days, which I know might not be the same for every group, right? But that was, to my experience. And after the first day, I will say we all walked away from it like, this almost feels a little too easy. And it wasn't really a bad thing, but it did, I think, make all of us really think about like, what does that really mean? Like, why is this so easy? Right. And not that things shouldn't be easy, right? I think it's good that it was easy, but it does sometimes feel like, well, what are we not talking, right? Like these things aren't that easy also, right? So what are we not hitting on? And, um, we came back the second day and we started with a reflection. And I think what it really got us into was, I think it allowed us to open up and really talk about the heart of what this all means. Um, and that conversation, I think, was probably the most important thing we did. And then it feels silly to say, but everything was easy after that, right? So it was almost like it was really easy before that, but it was like, oh, there's something missing because it's so easy, right? And then we were able to reflect on that, I think all of us, and then really dive into what does this mean? And that conversation, that reflection we were able to have, and that deep conversation we were able to get into was really what ultimately ended up driving, right, what the timeline was going to be, which I think even when we finished the first day wasn't what we were initially going into it thinking about. But once we got into like that, what does this really mean for all of us, right? And what is it that we all really want? And what's really important to us? And how are we going to make this successful, not only for us, but for our employees, right? And that really drove the timeline. And I will say, I think the timeline, in some ways surprised me, but in some ways also felt right. Like it made sense. It felt like everyone was moving at a pace that really worked for them. And we're working through it today. So, the best laid plans never end up the way you expect them. So who knows, right? Once other people are listening to this, timeline may be totally different from how I'm thinking about it today. But that was an interesting experience to go through, of really like coming in with one expectation and through a lot of really genuine and deep conversation, coming out with something different, but something that felt so right to all of us.
Yeah, and that's why we always use the phrase or the term of a roadmap, not a plan, right? This concept of, all right, we're in Colorado and we're going to head towards California, but we start going and then, oh, something happens. Someone got sick, or there's a snowstorm, or whatever that thing is, right? For Elizabeth and I, it was, I got pregnant after a couple years of trying, and I was so grateful, but I was also like, it's not really going to work for me to like become the president of the company next year. I'm also going to have a baby. So stuff like that comes up, and we get to adjust our roadmap as it goes. So I love Elizabeth's analogy. She starts driving along 70. There's a big snowstorm. She's like, my car's never going to make it. She goes, but at least I sort of know the direction I'm going. So now I can turn around and I can go south through Arizona instead of through the snow. And like, that's just the nature of these things, right? Is they will change and they will move, and the plan is going to pivot, and stuff's going to happen that you can't even anticipate. But that's why you have a plan, and that's why you have done, and I think you focused on what was most important here, right? Is you really know what those deal breakers are and what those most important things are for the people. And that will make all the rest of it kind of sort itself out, even though there will be roadblocks, as long as you can kind of root it in those things. There's a lot of good wisdom in that. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, well, since coming back from doing all this work, is there anything shifted in like how you're thinking about the future and your role and what's next for you?
Since coming back, it's really been just excitement. I think I will say, like, a lot of, some of this has been a natural shift, I think, over the past few months, past few years. And I think in a lot of ways it will continue to be, more of a natural evolution, right, and growth for me. But I think having that clarity has been what's really exciting to me, right? Going into it what I was missing was that clarity of what is this going to be and what is this going to look like? Um, and I have it now, right? We were able to really, my goal for the immersion had been to leave with like a clear path forward, right? And clear objectives, to where we want to go. And having that now, I feel a lot more confident and just almost relaxed in how the journey's going to go. I think there was anxiety and like, what is this journey going to look like and how's that going to affect me? And I don't have any of that anymore, right? Coming out of it, it's really just like this sense of calm of like, this is all going to work out. And, it's going to work out in a way that makes sense and is comfortable, right? And is like, what's what I'm looking for, but it's fulfilling for everyone.
And what does it mean? I mean, obviously, you were all very intentional coming in as the set of three of you to design it together. But to be a successor and to kind of sit at that table and to put your voice in about what the future looks like what does that mean to you?
So it's interesting with our business. I think we're very unique. And one of the things I've always loved about ProfitPoint is that it's really like you can do the work that you want to do. And in a lot of ways, you can make it what you want it to be. I think in some ways, I've also always found that daunting because it's like, well, what do you mean? Like, how do I know what I want to do and what I want to be? And as I've, over the past few years, I think I've started to gain some clarity around that, right? What work I really enjoy doing, what work I want to grow. But then also as we, bring on also kind of the next generation of employees, right? What is it that they like doing and what is it that they want to work on and how can I help support that, right? And transitioning into that role too, if it's also just not about me, right? And it's about how I can support them and help them figure out, right? What work is fun for them? What work do they enjoy doing, right? What types of things do they like working on, right? And I always think about it, at least for me, right? It's like, what are the problems I want to be solving, right? And how do I solve interesting problems that are going to truly help and make a difference, right? In other people's lives, right? In their work lives. And, hopefully also make an impact on like the world, a positive impact on, the world we live in and the communities that we work in.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And is there anything else you want to share just about kind of engaging and starting to think about a transition plan or being a successor or really anything in that world that I didn't give you a chance to answer in a previous question?
One thing that's really stuck with me that my dad said to me a long time ago is that none of us are essential, right? That in this company, just in general, right, in any company, like none of us are essential. That, the work you do or the contribution that you make, right, if you're not there, that might shift for the company, right? But it's really rare, like almost no one person is essential, right? And that, that what you do, it matters. It's not to say that it doesn't, but it also kind of doesn't matter, right? In a way that like, you're not that important. And I've thought a lot about that, and especially through this transition. And I think to me, that's been such a important piece of advice and such an important perspective to take that like, you're not essential, that I'm not essential, right? That I'm important, right? And that I can bring a lot to the table, right? And there's a lot I can do. But at the end of the day, like, and I think even through this transition, while, it's going to be weird and it's going to be hard, to not have Alan and Jim around, like, they, none of us really are essential, right? We're all, we've created and they've really, and, hopefully I'm contributing to that, right, have created this organism that's living and breathing, right? But it's made up of all of the individuals, right? It's not really it's not just them. It's not just me. And I think just keeping that in mind, going through the transition, has really helped just keep it all in perspective and also not make it feel so overwhelming.
Yeah. It's not all about you, but you can still honor and make sure that the journey is something you want to participate in. That's what I took away kind of from what you shared today. Like, it has to align with what I want and what's important to me and how I want to show up. And if so, then I'm going to work hard and I'm going to contribute. But also, it's really not all about me.
Right.
Yeah. I love that. Awesome. Cool. Well, to close, let's do our 3 closing questions. What have you chosen not to inherit?
I think it's what's the work I want to be doing in the future, right? And the work that everyone else wants to be doing. And, I'm not inherently choosing not to inherit some of the work that they've been doing and the projects they've taken on. But I think I'm approaching this with an open mind of if that's work that doesn't fit us in the future, right? That's okay. That I don't, that the next generation of this doesn't have to look like the first generation, but we can make it look like what we want it to look like. And we can, build the new relationships that are important to us and find the work that's important to us.
Yeah.
And it may be the same, but it may not be. And I think that's really, for me, what's so important.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of freedom in recognizing that. Awesome.
Yes.
And what's a part of your story that you're learning to honor right now?
I think just the believing in myself that this is something I can do. I think I more than had to prove it to anyone else, had to prove it to myself, that this is something that I can do and I want to do and is important to me to do, and that I'm, just honoring me in a way of like that this is something I can do.
Yeah.
And this is something I want to do, right? And because I want to do it, I can do it, right? And that I'm good enough.
Yeah, cool. And in one word, what are you the first of in your family?
The one word is the hardest part here. I think I would say this is not the most exciting answer, but I am going to be the first female business owner in my family. And I think that's something that a few years ago didn't feel that important or special, but I think I'm realizing, over the last few months, few years, like how important that is, and also how big of an achievement that is. That if, in my lifetime, it's always kind of felt like a given, but I think I'm realizing that it's not necessarily something to truly take for granted. And it does feel like there's a little bit of a responsibility that comes with it that I want to honor, and that's also really exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. We have to show the world how badass we are as the ladies. So I love it. Awesome. Well, thanks, Aviva, for coming on and sharing your experience. Like I said, it's extra special to know that some of your story was shaped by Marcy and some of the work that we do. So that's really special. And we thank you for letting us be a part of it with you. So,
well, we thank you for all of your help. So, we would not be here today if it weren't for you guys. So thank you for being a part of our journey as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks to everyone who's listening. We'll tune in and we'll see you next time on Your Next Gen Friend.
That's it for today. I hope today's episode offered some clarity or at least a little company. If this resonated, I'd be so grateful if you'd share it with another Next Gen. While my podcast is for the successors, you can also check out its sister show, The Business Transition Roadmap, hosted by my business partner, Elizabeth Ledoux. There's lots of great material in business and family succession over there. I hope you'll take a listen. Be well and see you next time.